there. So this, by the way, what's that right there? There's two things. There's the bulb thing, the olfactory bulb, olfactory tract, and what's that right there? Review here. Old opie. Okay. Optic nerve. Optic nerve. That's right. And then I'm pointing this out because if I were to do a mid-sagittal section, and I cut right in between where the two optic nerves cross over, optic chiasm is right there. It looks like it's coming from the optic chiasm. It's actually coming from the hypothalamus. Is this thing called the infundibulum. It just means stalk. It's a fancy way of saying stalk. That's the infundibulum, and that's the pituitary gland, right? Guess where the pituitary gland sits? Can anybody remember? It's like, step aside, Sella turcica. It's like, look out. Okay, so what are we up to now? Pituitary gland, infundibulum, stalk, optic chiasm. Okay, midbrain. Midbrain is just here. It's pretty boring, quite frankly. But then there's our little pine cone, our pineal gland, and just below it are the two bodies, because they make four altogether. So altogether, that'd be corporal quadrigemina. And then if I went to the top two bodies, you'd say superior colliculi, right? And then inferior colliculi. Just to let you know, this right here is a cerebral aqueduct, because that's the third ventricle. Because imagine, have I shared with my session with spackle? Nobody? Yeah, spackle fixes everything. You want me to invite me over? I'll bring my spackle, my spatula. In other words, you could fill that in, couldn't you? Because it's fluid filled. It's a ventricle inside there. And the fluid goes, oh, where do I go now? I'm in the third ventricle and I want to get to the fourth. Where should I go? Oh my gosh. There's a cerebral aqueduct. Oh my gosh, that's what it'll take. So I go down the cerebral aqueduct, then I'm in the fourth ventricle. I'm like, oh my God, how do I get out of here? Oh my gosh. Let me take an aperture. Right? So that right there is the fourth ventricle. If it doesn't show the lateral ventricles, I'm not going to ask you, right? So anyway, there's the pons, medulla oblongata. There's the arbor vitae, correct, of the cerebellum. There's the fovea of the cerebellum. That's the vermis of the cerebellum. The peduncles aren't shown here because I can't take the cerebellum out, but if I could, see it like this. It looks kind of like a musical note to me. And I'll draw it up on the board. That's the superior. The big one's the middle. It's not really differentiated very well in the models, but I'll show you how to think about it. And then the bottom one is the inferior. I'll make a drawing for you because I think it's a little hard to see at first. So done. Good. Good. And then finally, I'm just going to do this. This is a ventricular model, which kind of matches your image on page 77. This is inserted. Imagine this is just like superimposed inside the brain there. And this is how straightforward, this is like a cast of the fluid filled. Imagine if the fluid just turned solid, right? And you'd see that both of these extraordinary things are the lateral ventricles, right? And these are the horns, etc. They're all special names. All we have to do was lateral ventricles. And it kind of reminds me of like a Star Trek SS Enterprise, right? So from the bridge, these two things come down. What in our mind we should know the flow, right? So if we go from the lateral ventricles and we want to get to the third, where do we have to go through? Interventricular foramen, correct? There's actually two of them, and they fuse like that. And so what I've got my finger on right now, that's the third ventricle. And you know what that hole is? I know most people think the hole is a foramen. You know what that hole is for? And when you put it together, you're going to go, oh, let me go outside and just gather my thoughts, gather myself. That's where the interthalamic adhesion sits. And when that makes sense, you go, oh, got it. Right? So that's the third ventricle. And then if I want to get to the fourth, cerebral aqueduct, and then that's all the fourth. And then there's a median and two lateral apertures that look like they're broken off. But if you'll notice also there's pink on this model. The pink in this model signifies a choroid plexus, and there's one at every ventricle. So these are the choroid plexuses of the lateral ventricles, right? Choroid plexus of the third, choroid plexus of the fourth. Would you agree? So that's kind of nice. I mean, it's just like, okay.